Hey guys, Tightrope here, and in this video I'm going to be covering the basic mechanics of Company of Heroes 3 in enough detail to get you started. So first off, we're playing as one of 4 factions in the game. We're playing with the British forces here, and I chose them because they're quite straightforward to get started with. So Company of Heroes is quite different to other real-time strategy games. There's much less of an emphasis on base building. As you can see here, these are my tech structures. These are all the buildings I'm going to be making the entire game. So I've got 1, 2, 3, medic tent, and upgrade tent. So that's 5 buildings for the entire game. There are some offensive and defensive buildings you can plant on the field, such as bunkers and howitzers, but we'll cover that later. So to gain resources in Company of Heroes 3, you need to control the map. And you can see these different points outlined on the map. These are different resource sectors, and there are 3 resources in this game: fuel, munitions, and manpower. Now you see, actually I have a lot of manpower income at the moment, even though I don't control any sectors. You have a base manpower rate, and this decreases as your army gets larger. So if you're at full pop cap, 100 of 100, your manpower is quite a bit lower, probably about half of what it started as. So to gain resources from these points, you first have to capture them. So you have to send a squad of infantry, and some light vehicles can also capture these points. And just by standing in the point, you start capturing it. For a point like this, I think it takes around 25 to 35 seconds to capture. So there are different types of points. Got the and they all take different amounts of time to capture. Higher resource points, this is plus 16. They take the longest time to capture, whereas there are some plus 5 points. They are the shortest time to capture. And now that that sector is captured, we are now getting plus 10 extra fuel per minute. We started off with a base rate of 3. A very important point is that the resource sector needs to be connected to your base somehow for it to generate resources. Here you can see I got this 10 munitions point controlled at the moment, but it is not connected to my base. You can see that this sector here is white. I don't have it under my control. So I'm gaining no munitions per minute at the moment by holding this point. So you need to connect the sectors to your base for them to generate resources, and that can be a pretty good way of damaging your opponent's economy. For instance, if I captured all this territory out here, if my opponent captured this one sector, most of this will be cut off unless I'm connected all the way through here as well. So going for these points, these manpower points, often cut-offs, and they can cut off a lot of your opponent's resources very quickly. A good way of harassing your opponent. And if your opponent controls a point, you go into the capture circle. First the point will decapture, and then it will neutralize, and then you'll start capturing it. If your capturing gets interrupted at some stage, say you leave the circle, it will return to the state it was last in. So if you were capping, it will go back to neutral, and if you were decapping, then it will go back to fully in that player's control. Munitions are another one of the resources. These typically are used for troop upgrades. So in this case, we've got the Royal Engineer. It's got 2 upgrades over here in the UI. The Flamethrower or the Sweeper. You can only go for one of these 2. Flamethrower, good against units inside buildings. Units in cover. Makes it quite a strong anti-infantry squad. Whereas the Minesweeper is good for sweeping mines, can cut wire. So it's more of a defensive upgrade in case your opponent has planted a bunch of mines. Also, munitions used on special abilities such as throwing grenades, anti-tank grenades, smoke grenades, sprints sometimes, or from abilities in your battle group. So instead of commanders in Company of Heroes 2, now we've got these battle groups. You start off with 3 as the option, and this is how many points you have. At the moment you can see I have 0 points because we're at the start of the game and we haven't been involved in any fighting. So you gain these points over time, some just from just existing, and quite a lot more from actually fighting your opponent. Getting in fights helps accelerate these points. So you can see what's inside these battle groups. We have 3 different options here on the right hand side of the screen, and inside these are a bunch of special units, special abilities, maybe like economic advantages like this one here. This one boosts up the firepower of your infantry. This is like a special squad of infantry, extra powerful. And then you have like big off-map artillery strikes. These cost a lot of munitions. Special howitzer. So these battle groups really add the spice to your different builds. But you can only choose one of these 3 battle groups. So we'll go for the one at the top here, the Indian Artillery Battle Group. And at the start you can see now we've got 1 point. So we can select anything here that costs 1 point. So you can see that there's kind of a fork. You can only go for one of these two options. So if I select this, it'll lock out that.
Mortars are available to deploy.
So you do have a few choices to make. You can't just have your cake and eat it too. You can't have every single option in all the battle groups. And it's up to you to find your way through the battle groups to decide which options you want at which time and prioritize putting your points into that. So you get your power spikes to fight your opponent at the right timing. And the final resource is fuel. This is mainly used to construct vehicles and also for your tech. You can see these tech structures have fuel costs. We've got 15 for the first one, 55 for the second, and 110 for the third. So these stages of tech unlock progressively stronger and stronger units. At the end stage, we have very strong infantry and very strong tanks and team weapons. So the final point on the map that I haven't covered is called the victory points. We have 3 of them on this particular map. One here, and one here. And these are the main win condition for Company of Heroes 3. You want to drain your enemy's points down to 0. So if you hold a majority of the points, in this case we hold 1, to neutral, the points will start draining against the enemy over time. So if you hold all 3 of the points and they hold 0, they'll drain out very quickly. But if you reach a bit of a stalemate, in this case you can see I hold 1, they hold 1, and 1 remains neutral, no points will be draining out from either player. So it's kind of dissimilar to Battlefield where points will continue to drain, and this can allow matches to be prolonged by stalling out the game in this fashion. You can also win by destroying your opponent's base via annihilation victory, all the structures, and then you don't have to kill the bunkers, just the main buildings. But this is quite rare in Company of Heroes. Most, like probably 99% of victories will come through the victory point system. So at the start of the game, what you want to do is build your first tech structure. I would recommend putting it at the edge of your base. You can plant it wherever you want. And your engineers will run out from your base and start constructing it automatically. You don't need to specifically build it with your starting unit. You can just run out onto the map and start capturing it immediately with them, and leave your base engineers that spawn out of your base to do the construction for you. This is really nice. And once you've got that completed, you can start constructing units from here as well. You have a couple units you can build from your home base, and this will vary from faction to faction. And here you have some more unit options. This is a mainline infantry squad, the infantry section, and in most games you'll probably want about 2 of these unless you're doing some kind of special build. 2 or 3 infantry sections or grenadiers, riflemen, hard to go wrong. And then once you've captured the map, you've been fighting your enemy, get to the next stage, you can go to the next stage of tech. And you can see that to build the final stage of tech, I will need to have this completed. So that's what I meant by Brits are a linear faction, because you have to construct the preceding tech structure before you can construct the next one. So there are no skips available here to the British forces. And from that follow-up tech structure, now I have more advanced options. I can build an anti-tank gun, a light vehicle, and a truck that can reinforce my units and carry them around. And then I also have side tech down the side here. This will unlock these 2 units down here, the Bishop Artillery and the Stuart Light Tank. Also have side tech here, anti-tank grenade packages. So look for side tech options in your tech buildings, and you can access your tech buildings by using the F1 key. They'll always access your headquarters building, F2, your next tech structure, F3, F4, F5, out to the end. So very easy to access these via hotkeys, F1 to 5, nice and simple. So just as a side note, this is CheatCommands Mod up here. This is kind of a sandbox mode, allows you to do a whole bunch of things. At the moment I'm giving myself infinite resources and infinite instant production on everything. So if you guys want to come and test some things out, CheatCommands Mod, you get it in the Steam Workshop. Highly recommended. So similar to side tech that we saw on the base structures, you also often have multiple upgrades on infantry squads. In this case for the infantry section, they have 3 upgrades. Recce package, which gives them better vision, gives them scoped rifles, reasonably good long range, boys anti-tank rifles, good against light vehicles, and LMGs, like good straight up firepower on them. So you can adapt your build depending on what your opponent's doing based on these upgrades. So one of the key mechanics in Company of Heroes Your squads start out somewhere between 3 and 6 models, depending on what type you have. You can see that over time, 1 or 2 men can end up dying, and you want to try keep your entire squad, and you want to try and keep your squad alive if possible. So to do this, you can hit the retreat button out here, and when your unit is retreating, it is much harder for your opponent to kill. Not only do they run back to base incredibly quickly, so infantry squads won't be able to keep pace with them. Tanks can probably chase you down, but infantry can't. They're 50% harder to hit, and they take 25% less damage when they do get hit. So you are very survivable when you are in the retreating state with your squads of infantry. And you do really want to keep your squads alive because you have a mechanism here called Veterancy. As you can see, we have 3 stars available. You gain Veterancy over time, mainly from doing damage to your opponent with that unit. Veterancy varies from unit to unit. Quite often, the first stage of Veterancy, you get some extra ability, maybe ability to throw a grenade or sprint, something like that. So the second and third stars of Veterancy are usually straight up combat bonuses, but this does vary from unit to unit. This could be an accuracy bonus, defensive bonus, your unit becomes harder to hit, might get more armor, might be able to drive faster, faster reload. So yeah, a bunch of different things. It varies from unit to unit and between vehicles and infantry. But yeah, you get bonuses from Veterancy, so your unit becomes stronger over time. So if you keep your units alive and your opponent does not, that adds up to a massive advantage in terms of combat strength at the end of the match. The other reason why you want to keep your units alive is because of the reinforcement system. So you can see here, each man costs 28 manpower to reinforce. Whereas, and say multiply that by 5, that's roughly half the price of building it anew. So it's a massive economic advantage to retreat your unit and reinforce it over rebuilding it. You can also get healing back at base as well, so your men will come back onto the battlefield full strength. This is quite helpful because otherwise you'll be running low health units out onto the field, they'll die immediately, they won't really be able to accomplish much, and then you're going to have to reinforce them anyway, costing you manpower. So healing is quite handy to get at some stage of the game, though not too early. You want to be making sure you have a firm grasp on the map, maybe even push to your first light vehicle before you go to healing, because it typically does cost fuel. So an overview of the types of different units. Here we have infantry. Then we have team weapons in the center. Here we have the machine gun. And this can set up. You can see it's got a wide arc of fire. So team weapons take a while to set up and pack up. So they're quite slow moving around, but firing in this cone is very, very powerful for them. Same story with the anti-tank gun here. Similar story. It takes a while to set up and a while to pack up. You can see the timing indicator on how long it takes. Differences between those, though, is that the machine gun can retreat, whereas the anti-tank gun cannot. You can only use reverse on this, which is handy. If you want to try get it out of here as fast as possible, reversing in a way is useful. And it's a similar story for vehicles. They can also reverse and drive forwards. Vehicles have this mechanic called armor, though. So you can see that tanks are strong on the front. They have high armor on the front, medium armor on the sides, and low armor on the rear. So you typically want to be facing the front of your vehicle towards the enemy, and if you do that, you have a chance to bounce the enemy's fire. It of course depends on the caliber. Super big like a Tiger is still going to penetrate the Stuart every time on the frontal armor. But like anti-tank rifles, maybe bazookas, you might be able to bounce them off the frontal armor. Maybe like armor-piercing rounds on machine guns, stuff like that. So if possible, you always want to have the frontal armor facing towards the enemy to have the highest chance of taking less damage. Another key mechanic in Company of Heroes is called cover. You can see as I have this unit selected and I'm moving around these obstacles, these yellow dots appear, and this means light cover is available in the area. So if I move the squad into that area, you can see the shield comes up on the icon. That means they are now in light cover. However, cover in Company of Heroes is directional. So, coming from this direction, I'm behind the cart, I'm going to be guarded. But if the enemy approaches from this direction, this is not going to be applicable. no defensive bonuses available. So in the case of light cover, going off Company of Heroes 2 numbers, it made these units 50% harder to hit with small arms damage. And what I mean with small arms damage is pretty much like any machine gun, bolt action rifle, stuff like that. Anything that's not like a cannon on a vehicle, roughly. Small arms damage or explosives like grenades. Now over here you can see now there are green dots, and this means there is heavy cover available in this option. This is on the sturdier wheeled objects such as, you know, like stone walls, behind trucks, so on and so forth. Like sturdier looking wheeled objects provide you with stronger cover, and this does provide a stronger defensive bonus as well. Company of Heroes 2, this also reduced the amount of damage the unit took when they were in heavy cover. So they were both 50% harder to hit, and they also took 50% less damage. So heavy cover, very powerful. Using cover on your squads of infantry is a real force multiplier over your opponent. However, if your enemy gets like right up close to you, they will negate cover. Like inside a certain range, not exactly sure what it is for Company of Heroes 3, cover is negated. So, you know, if you've got a close range squad, something with like submachine guns, it's quite good to charge into the enemy right into their face, and then once you're close enough, they will no longer have the defensive bonuses of cover. The final type of cover is called garrison cover, and that's provided by ambient buildings on the map, such as these around here. And it's quite important to scope out the building first. You can see it's got doors, so you have to enter and exit through these doors, so it kind of limits the ways you can enter and exit buildings. Also, you can see they have a certain number of windows, so that's how many men can fire out in this direction. So you can see in this case, I've got a 6-man squad here, but only 5 windows pointing this direction. So 1 man from the squad will not be able to fire over here. So pay attention. Same story over here. There's like 2 windows here, so only 2 men will fight in this direction. So jumping in buildings, typically very strong, offers similar defensive bonuses to heavy cover, and on top of that, some extra bonuses. Inside buildings, you are immune to suppression. So buildings are very strong, and it can be quite a good idea to put a machine gun inside a building. It's a very strong, hard to assault position. And then, you know, because a heavy machine gun typically only relies on the gunner firing, having 1 window facing one direction is really all you need. So yeah, MGs in buildings can be pretty hard to counter. Oftentimes you need a mortar or something long range to force them out. And it can be a very strong option in the early game. But speaking of machine guns, when you're inside buildings, you are immune to suppression. But typically, units with flamethrowers are very good at countering buildings, so watch out for enemies running up at you using flamethrowers to fight against buildings. So speaking of suppression, here it is. When a squad has this exclamation point on their profile, that means they are suppressed now. And when you are suppressed, your squad can only crawl around very slowly, maybe about a quarter of the usual speed, and they go into this lying down position. And then once they've been fired at for a bit longer, they go into this mode called pinned. So when you are suppressed, your offensive capabilities of that squad go way down. Your accuracy tanks, your reload speed horrible, so your DPS is maybe like 1/8 of what it usually is. Useless. When your squad is pinned, they become completely unresponsive. The only thing you can do with them is retreat at that stage. But being suppressed does give you defensive bonuses, so you can hang around in suppression for a while if you need to, while you flank around the machine gun, attack it from a different angle, and force it away. Because while you're suppressed, you won't be taking much damage from small arms fire, and small arms, in this case, I'm going to include heavy machine gun firing, but it won't offer you any defensive bonuses against vehicles such as tanks or grenades. So, if somebody throws a grenade at you while you're suppressed, time to get out of there. At least that's how it worked in Company of Heroes 2. On top of cover providing defensive bonuses, making your units harder to kill, it also makes them more resistant to suppression. So if a machine gun starts shooting at you and you're behind heavy cover, it will take much longer to suppress than if the unit was out in the open. And heavy cover provides more suppression protection than light cover does. So different units have different roles in Company of Heroes. You can tell what they do by the descriptor down if you have selected the unit. In this case it says anti-infantry and anti-vehicle. Typically if they have both of these, this means it's a generalist. So they'll be decent at both, but they'll lose to a specialist in either realm. Here we have the anti-tank gun that is only good against tanks. Anti-tank gun. The Crusader, this can do anti-infantry and anti-air. And the Centaur here, anti-infantry and anti-structure. And you can see these descriptions before you build the unit, so you're not flying blind. You don't have to construct the unit before you figure out what it's good against. So this can be really helpful for figuring out what you need to build to counter what your opponent is producing. So you may be wondering what makes something a specialist. Well, here we have the 6-pound anti-tank gun. You see it can fire all the way out to this yellow dot here. Very far range on it. It's also got a wide arc, good rate of fire, good penetration and damage. Whereas the generalist here can only fire out to here. I mean, the AT gun was all the way out to here. So a massive range advantage. One thing that I found quite confusing when I started playing Company of Heroes was how can an anti-tank gun, which does so much damage to a tank, be completely useless against infantry. And it really comes down to AoE. The anti-tank gun has a tiny AoE, so you're so unlikely to hit the enemy, and when you do, it does so little damage. Whereas these more generalists or anti-infantry specialists have really good AoE, so they're good at chunking down big squads of infantry. So now's a good time to talk about criticals. These are debuffs that units can experience when affected by certain abilities. So in this case I have an anti-tank grenade upgraded on my infantry sections, and if I throw this at the enemy's tank, once it goes off, you can see this exclamation mark on the profile, and same down here, crew shocked. In this case, yellow criticals are temporary and red are permanent. And crew shocks gives a speed debuff to that vehicle for 5 to 10 seconds. I can't remember exactly what. So yellow criticals time sensitive, we're off over time. Whereas there's a mine down here, and when I run over this with my tank, now I have engine damage. That's a red critical, and I have to repair this tank to get rid of that engine damage. So you can eventually give engine damage to a tank just by throwing anti-tank grenades at it, and for that the tank has to be at or below 50% health after the damage has been applied. So it's going to take me one more anti-tank grenade here, and then I think it's going to be enough. So now it's below 50% health, which you can check down here. It's at 270 health out of 600, and that's resulted in an engine crit. So yeah, engine crits, a really good way of killing a vehicle, because once it's moving around at a snail's pace from that mine or from that anti-tank grenade, easy for you to swoop in with your vehicles or anti-tank guns and knock it out. So a new feature to Company of Heroes 3 is tank riding. You can actually get your squads of infantry to jump on top of tanks and then drive them around. This is a pretty good way of moving your units around from one side of the map to the other. In this case it looks like the animation is bugged out. But typically tanks drive around about twice as fast as infantry can run, so this is a pretty good way of moving your squads maybe from base out to the front lines, or from one side of the map to the other. You can also do this with a lot of like trucks. If you see that icon, a kind of rectangle with the triangle at the bottom, that means you can jump into that vehicle. So there are half tracks, trucks like this can also carry units around, and it's a good way of getting places faster, especially on those really big 4v4 maps, which can take a very long time for a squad of infantry to run from base back up to the front line. So that's it, a quick overview of the key mechanics in the Company of Heroes franchise, and hopefully this is enough to get you started on your Company of Heroes journey nice and smoothly. If you want to learn the best methods to capture territory the fastest way possible, check out this other video that I made.